Everyone, thank you for your patience. House Democrats stand ready to get to work on behalf of everyday Americans. From the very beginning of this Congress, we have said that we are willing to find common ground with House Republicans whenever and wherever possible, while at the same time being prepared to confront extremism whenever necessary. The extremists and the House Republican Conference have once again taken control of the House floor and stopped us from doing the business of the American people. This is extraordinary. And we stand ready to find common ground with the other side of the aisle if they can break from their extremists. The problem that seems to exist is that the House Republican Conference is captive to the most extreme wing of their party. Well, at the same time, we're thankful for the leadership of President Biden. President Biden was able to arrive at a resolution that avoided a dangerous default and stopped the extreme MAGA Republicans from crashing the economy and triggering a job-killing recession, which would have inflicted tremendous pain on millions of everyday Americans. House Democrats remain thankful for the leadership of President Biden, which spared the country from another hostage-taking situation that the extremists have now made clear they would have been ready to bring about the first opportunity they had to do just that. But the debt ceiling has now been suspended into the early part of 2025, thanks to the leadership of President Biden. We're also thankful that President Biden was able to negotiate a resolution consistent with our values that protected Social Security, protected Medicare, protected Medicaid, protected veterans, protected education, protected public safety, protected the Inflation Reduction Act, and protected the American people from the draconian 22% across-the-board cuts that would have undermined the health, the safety, and the well-being of everyday Americans. So this week puts into clear focus the choices that the American people have in front of them in terms of which direction their government will go. On the one side, Democrats, team reasonable, team normal, and team get stuff done. On the other side, Republicans, team chaos, team dysfunction, and team extreme.
Thank you. Do you have any concerns that the hostage-taking strategy employed by MAGA Republicans, that one can say now is eternal Republican issue, can become the norm in the House with the potential to block the country and impact the lives of everyday Americans? And how do you assess MAGA Republicans blocking the rule in a way that has not been done in the past 20 years? And what do you see as the way out in working for a common good of America?
In terms of the way out, House Republicans are going to have to decide whether they're going to be responsible public policy makers or continue to bend the knee to the extreme MAGA Republicans in their party. This is a very serious situation in that the extreme MAGA Republicans have stopped the House of Representatives from doing the business of the American people. There are several things that need to happen, including the reauthorization of the Farm Bill, the reauthorization of the FAA, so that the American people can fly safely in this country and that our economy can continue to function in a normal way. We have to reach a spending agreement so that the needs of the American people can be reached. But right now, there is no activity happening in the Congress because of the extreme nature of the House Republican Conference. That's sad.
On redistricting in New York, there's arguments this week, right, in some of the litigation around that. Do you think the new makeup of the court will make it more receptive to the case being brought by Democrats?
That's not clear to me, and ultimately, I think the case right now is before the third department, as I understand it, which is the intermediate level court, and so we'll see what decisions are made. I think what is clear to me is that the notion that the people of the state of New York should be forced to make decisions as to who represents them based on a partisan map drawn by an unelected, out-of-town special master signed off on by a right-wing judge who was hand-selected in a forum shopping exercise by partisan Republicans is ridiculous. Now, what the legal case is in terms of how that resolves itself on the merits, I leave to the lawyers and ultimately the judges, and I will respect whatever judge or judicial decision is rendered.
Thank
Sorry,
you,
we go-
Leader Jeffries.
All right, go back to this side. Yeah.
I have two very different questions. I have those for both. One, have you been debriefed on the SCOTUS decision in Alabama? They just struck down the congressional map. If so, what's your immediate reaction to that? Two, do you think McCarthy is a weak speaker because he cannot get out of this situation yet? You're going into next week not even knowing when you're going to vote.
Well, I think Kevin McCarthy is going to continue to work the dynamics out on his side of the aisle as best he can. And he's in a very difficult situation because of the extreme nature of the House Republican Conference. That situation is what it is, but they need to work it out because the American people are the ones suffering with the House of Representatives shut down. I haven't had the opportunity to review the Supreme Court decision, but it appears to be an affirmation that the Voting Rights Act is the law of the land, and it is illegal to engage in race-based gerrymandering. It's clear that the Alabama legislature engaged in race-based gerrymandering. And they're not the only ones throughout the country who have done that. And we can at least draw some comfort from the fact that the 1965 Voting Rights Act remains alive.
Thank you, Leader Jeffries. Two questions. One, what is your response to China and Cuba reaching a secret agreement for China to establish an electronic eavesdropping facility on the island? And second, would House Dems have a discharge petition if the Senate passes a supplemental defense spending bill that includes aid for Ukraine?
Well, I have no comment on the first issue until I have the opportunity to be briefed on it. With respect to the Democratic approach in terms of any supplemental, our view is that a resolution was reached consistent with the conversations that took place between President Biden and House Republicans that was subsequently voted on and passed with decisive margins in both the House and the Senate, and that is the law of the land.
Thank you, Leader Jeffries.
Thank you. Paul?
Following up on that answer right there, would House Democrats support appropriations bills that came in below the camps?
No.
Mr. Leader? Mr. Leader?
Thank you for asking such a clear question.
Mr. Leader, based off, building on this point you're making about the House conservatives kind of blocking everything that Kevin McCarthy is attempting to do, you've had success here through this debt ceiling negotiation and Democrats and Republicans kind of partnering to get that legislation passed and in many ways isolating that very small faction of far-right Republicans that are causing Mr. McCarthy grief. Isn't there some rationale toward you working with Kevin McCarthy going forward to find common ground on bipartisan legislation on a regular basis so that every single time he runs into trouble with that faction, that they aren't as big an issue and have such a loud voice in these negotiations?
Yeah, House Democrats have made clear from the very beginning that we will continue to try to find common ground whenever and wherever possible. But the majority has a responsibility in managing the floor in terms of the legislation that is brought before the body for votes to take place. And it's not clear right now that the majority has the capacity to be able to manage the House floor because the extremists have taken it over. That's quite unfortunate, and we're hopeful that it gets worked out before we return next week.
Mr. Leader,
Let me go back to the side and I'll go over to you.
thank you.
Do you agree with the decision from Director Wright to provide the Oversight Committee access to the 1023 document? And what do you make of Speaker McCarthy declaring it a victory?
It's not clear to me that it's a victory. It seems to me that it was an accommodation that was reasonable, that was reached, and it's our hope that this will put an end to the foolishness that is going on under the Republican-controlled Oversight Committee. I mean, the House Republicans, from the very beginning of this new Congress, have engaged in a fishing expedition that has one goal: destroy Joe Biden and his family. It's not working. And in the process, they are undermining the rule of law and are willing to attack law enforcement, attack the FBI, and attack the Department of Justice, all for partisan political purposes because they believe that it will benefit them in 2024. They're wrong.
Sort of along those lines, but a bit more broad, what are your thoughts on the Oversight Committee canceling the hearing today?
I mean, the Oversight Committee is in a complete and total embarrassment right now. They have failed to do any damage politically to President Biden, which is the standard by which they have themselves said they expect to be judged. And if anything, they continue to prove the point that this group of Republicans is too extreme for the American people.
I was wondering if you think that regulators should take a look at the Live and PGA Tour merger, and also how you feel about WWE performing shows in Saudi Arabia.
I've got no real comment on that right now. I mean, I think that to the extent there are antitrust laws that have been implicated by the proposed merger, then I would expect that the Congress would do its job.
Mr. Leader,
Thank you.
2 questions. Yesterday, Biden vetoed legislation that will block his student loan forgiveness program. So why do some of your colleagues continue to oppose efforts to help those struggling with student loan debt?
It's shocking to me that many of my House Republican colleagues, on the one hand, want to continue to do everything possible to enact big tax cuts for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected, and pretend as if that's going to benefit the economy when there is no evidence that that's the case. All House Republicans have done consistently, including but not limited to the passage of the GOP tax scam, where 83% of the benefits went to the wealthiest 1%, and they exploded the debt by $2 trillion, is to do everything possible to subsidize the lifestyles of the wealthiest people in this country, and then undermine the ability of everyday Americans, including students, to pursue the American dream. And we're going to make clear to the American people that our focus will continue to be on standing up for middle-class folks, for those who aspire to be part of the middle class, for working families, for students, for young people, for older Americans, for the poor, the sick, the afflicted, the least, the lost, and the left behind. And that is a big contrast to our colleagues who continue to stand up for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected.
Thank you. Second question here. In Florida, a white woman has been arrested for fatally shooting her black neighbor, a mother of 4, through a front door. The woman was allegedly angry that the deceased woman's kids were playing in a field close to her apartment. Now, given the facts, obviously this was a senseless killing, but what can Congress do to prevent or curb these tragedies?
Well, this is Gun Violence Prevention Month, and Congress has been derelict in its duty under this House Republican majority to do anything to combat the epidemic of gun violence in America. In fact, what we expect to see when House Republicans can finally get their act together and bring bills to the floor is that they won't use that moment to strike a blow against the gun violence epidemic, but instead will continue to unleash weapons of war on the American people. Democrats will use every tool available to us to try to get legislation to the floor that would do something meaningful to promote gun safety in America.
Thank you, Mr. Leader.
Thank you.
Given the situation right now in the House, it's a long way away, but does this worry you that there could be a heightened chance of a government shutdown later in the year?
Well, I have full confidence in Rosa DeLauro and the Appropriations Committee on the Democratic side of the aisle to work through the process and arrive at an agreement in terms of spending decisions that promote the health, the safety, and the economic well-being of the American people. It's my hope that we will have good faith partners on the other side of the aisle to engage in this appropriations process in a manner that does not result in the extreme MAGA Republicans shutting down the government.
Thank you, Leader Jeffries. Following up on Ryan's question about the rule, we understand the tradition that the minority party votes against the rule, but don't imagine that that's a very compelling argument when you go back to a town hall and say, well, we support the legislation, but we don't support this procedural thing to vote on the legislation. I don't think a lot of people understand that. So suddenly you have leverage here. You could go to McCarthy and say, we will help you get a rule to the floor if you give us X, Y, and Z on a bipartisan bill. Why not use that leverage that you have suddenly been given?
Well, at this point in time, there is no legislation in front of us that we believe is enlightened and will advance the interests of the American people. To the extent that opportunity presents itself, we'll explore the best path forward in conversation with members of the House Democratic Caucus. That's not the case right now. This week, what House Republicans wanted to do is to try to strike a blow against the ability of President Biden and his administration to protect the American people in terms of reasonable, consumer-centered regulation and other measures that are designed to protect the environment, clean air, clean water, and the health of the American people. Extreme MAGA Republicans also wanted us to spend this week talking about kitchen appliances, right? As part of some phony narrative that Joe Biden and Democrats want to take away gas stoves. Nothing can be further from the truth. So we don't have serious legislation that is in front of us at the moment. And if that opportunity arises, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Have you spoken to the Speaker about that possibility?
No.
Last question?
I'm sorry. Sorry. I didn't get to you. I don't know if you did. Was your question answered?
He asked most of my questions.
Okay.
But just to follow up, last week in the dramatic moment when you held up the green card and unleashed the Democratic votes on the rule, have you had a previous conversation with McCarthy letting him know that you would back him on the rule if he didn't come to vote?
I didn't have a conversation with the Speaker about specifically our response to that moment, other than first urging him to make sure that he worked as hard as he could to bring the rule through the House of Representatives so that we could vote on the underlying bill. By tradition, that is the role of the majority, and this was a resolution that House Republicans themselves negotiated. But we also made clear, privately and publicly, that we would not allow America to default. And of course, everybody understood that in trying to make sure that didn't happen, if an extraordinary number of Republicans decided to try to tank the rule, that Democrats would have to step in to rescue Republicans from their extremism. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.